He sees his name, I don't see my name. And that was the first time I cried, bro, like in front of my homie. Like real talk. I was just so upset at the fact that I didn't make the team. Relationships have seasons. Sometimes the season is up and it's time to move forward. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. That was such a word that I needed in my heart in such a time. And as much of a emotional pain that disappointment can bring, I think it's up to us to be willing to look at those experiences and ask ourselves, what is this disappointment that I'm experiencing perhaps teaching me? I mean, first and foremost, man, we just got to be honest that there are moments where we're disappointed with God. We are disappointed that God did not show up. That, man, I should just be doing more. I should just be doing better. That's where the disappointment comes from, right? I should just be doing better. But allow me to encourage you that it's hard to know how to do better when better wasn't presented in front of you. The disappointment that I experienced, the crushing feelings that I experienced, was really because I was just ignoring reality. It wasn't because they were a bad person. It wasn't because they were awful. It wasn't because they were a hater and they're a manipulator and a gaslighter and a narcissist. All these favorite words that we like throwing around. No, it was just I was expecting more than what I was actually getting. Yo, what's happening, party people? Welcome back to another episode of Just Processing Together, you and I. And today we are talking about disappointment. Okay, so glad that you're here. Coach Sean Walker, by the way. So excited that you're here. And disappointment is a real thing. Disappointment is a real emotion. Disappointment is a very, very heavy experience that I think all of us have had in one way or another in different areas and facets of our lives. Relationships with people, expectations, jobs that didn't come through, money that may not have came through, certain things that we wanted, that we had our eyes set on, and we came to realize that we couldn't get it. We couldn't afford it. Maybe it was, maybe you're a sports fan. You've experienced different disappointments of your favorite team losing a big game. Maybe it was being a sport participant and experiencing disappointment in losing, in not making a team. You've experienced disappointment in so many facets in different areas of life in everyday living. And the first thing I really want to be sure that we get out of the box and just square away is the idea that we cannot avoid disappointment. Disappointment is something that is going to happen throughout the course of our lives. Why? Because we're imperfect people. And anytime you put imperfect people in the same setting, the same relationship, the same connection, there is always going to be a window of opportunity to be disappointed, to be let down, to be frustrated, to feel as if there is something that didn't happen for you that you wanted to happen for you. Maybe it can disguise itself in forms of neglect, where there was something that was supposed to be given to you and it wasn't given to you. It can disguise itself in forms of heartbreak, where somebody you least expected to treat you a specific way ends up treating you a specific way. There are so many different lanes that we can travel in this conversation. But if I would like to just dive into this with a genuine perspective, of course, I got to give my own story and context to some of the disappointments that I've experienced. It really starts in basketball. I definitely have a story, maybe a unique story in some ways, spending majority of my time in grade school being cut from basketball teams. I actually can remember the time I got cut from 7th grade and 8th grade specifically. 7th grade was really different. I was just coming off of a massive leg injury that I had that required surgery. And so, even though it was something that I really felt like I could do, and basketball was a sport I had been playing for a while up to that point, man, yeah, that one crushed me. I was pretty crushed being cut in my 7th grade middle school year, coming off of that leg injury, having a lot of expectations, thinking I was going to be able to get on the team and actually play the sport that I care for, which was basketball. Tears, crying, very frustrated. Oh, yeah, your boy felt that. 8th grade came around, same result. And this one left me feeling even more because I was met with that same rejection again. It was really different. And I think even more so difficult because I think that same year, my homie, my best friend, he ends up making the team. And so he tried out, and even listening to his story and him sharing with me that the reason he tried out was just because his family really wanted him to. Wasn't really something that he actually cared for. He was more of a football kind of guy anyway. And it really hurt me that he made the team and I didn't. And I'm going to be so honest, and this is nothing new that I'm telling you that I've told him. But even at that time, I was like, bro, how did he make the team and I didn't? It was one of those. Like, I thought I'm kind of better than you, though. I feel like I'm better than you at this sport. I don't know how you made this team and I didn't. And I remember him being over the night where the teams were announced. They would post the whole list on the school website in the sports section. Everybody would go there to check and see and find their name to see if they made the cut. If your name wasn't on the list, you got cut. And looking through the list, looking through my name, never found it. His name gets shown up on there. So he celebrates. He's over my house, my parents' house. And he sees his name. I don't see my name. And that was the first time I cried, bro, like in front of my homie, like real talk. I was just so upset at the fact that I didn't make the team. And it was a pretty rough going, at least for the rest of the evening. Not even necessarily for the rest of the evening, but maybe so for the next maybe few minutes, just for me to kind of process that and let it go. But it didn't stop there. Those two massive disappointments in basketball were pretty big and big enough for me. But going into my freshman year and sophomore year, same situation. New school, going into high school, getting cut. Okay. Now, these next two didn't really bring me to so many tears as prior to, as much as it was just, bro, I'm just frustrated at this point, right? Freshman year, I get cut. I decided to become a manager for the basketball team. And it was definitely an experience, definitely a time that I don't regret because there were a lot of things I was able to learn just being on the outside looking in terms of the flow of the game, in terms of play calling, positioning, the different coaching aspects that they were throwing out there. What's crazy is even at this same time, being a freshman and sophomore, not on the team and being in a management role, I was actually trusted with filming. I was trusted with stat keeping, all those kinds of things. And so, believe it or not, that a lot of that stuff in some way, shape, or form had its early seed planting for what I currently do here on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But at the time, I was not there for it. I was nowhere near thinking of the stuff that I'm doing now. And it sucked being cut in both of those times. But extreme disappointment seeing people, seeing players go into the locker rooms, not really be appreciative of the position they had, didn't really take it as seriously. Lackadaisical in practice, it showed up in the games. And always telling myself while I was on the outside looking in that, man, not only would I do anything to be in that position at the time, because that's how much it meant to me, but I just knew I wouldn't take it for granted like a lot of these guys do. I finally make it my junior year. Definitely got that opportunity senior year. I end up starting as captain, broke records, those kinds of things. Like, it's a dope story. Maybe one day we can get into it. But I experienced great different levels of disappointment all throughout that tenure of being cut from the basketball team. Being cut didn't feel good. I felt rejected, unwanted, and as if I was just chopped liver in a lot of ways. Just not even cared for, not even looked for in the direction of it. And a part of me was disappointed because a lot of my friends were on the team. I wasn't on it. I felt like an outcast. There was a part of me that was disappointed because I didn't want to be viewed in a specific light due to being cut. Not feeling good enough, not being good enough. And then as a result, friends and people just treating me differently because I wasn't on the same team or I didn't have the same skill set. And there was a lot of that happening throughout that tenure as well. But experiencing disappointment in that was one thing. Okay. And that one hurt. Then there were disappointments that I experienced relationally and disappointments with friendships. Okay. I went through a period of season of my life, actually specifically when COVID went down, that I had to really readdress a lot of friendships and relationships. That was one of those periods where frustration was at its peak because I realized that when I stopped putting in the energy and the effort into cultivating and connecting with people, they didn't reach out. They didn't really care to hold conversations. They didn't really care to check in. And because I'm not necessarily in the maturity that I carry today, I definitely took that personally. And I remember going through a challenge at the time with a coaching community that I had just got introduced to, where part of one of the days that we were doing is called the Purge. We were just dealing with a lot of character development and just addressing a lot of things in this 30-day period. One of them was the relationships. And so I took the time to send messages, reach out to people, something that I was really scared of doing because I've never been the type of person to address somebody directly regarding what's bothering me. It's always been, I'm going to just leave it in the air, right? I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to feel some type of way. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be sad, right? I'm going to feel slighted, but it's going to be in the background. You're not going to notice it. You're not going to see it. I'm not going to say nothing. I just know that I see it. I'm reading between the lines. And like when I stop engaging with you, just know that I caught the drift, right? I caught it. And there's no need to talk about it. I was always that kind of individual. But this time, this is what started planting the seeds of me to learn how to be direct, how to have honest conversations up front. And a lot of the answers that I got from that man just made me even more upset. Oh, I was really busy. Life is going crazy and just don't really have all that opportunity and time and all those kinds of things. And in my mind, I was like, man, but that's not your response to other friends that you have, people that you really care for, people that you really have love for. That's not your response. And I know that's not your response because that's not my response to the people I really care for and the people I really love. Like, I'm going to make time for that. And I felt some type of way, man, to be completely honest. It was a very rough time for me relationally in my friendships and my circles that I had to readdress. I had to do, and it just really bothered me. Carried a lot of bitterness and anger in that and disappointment because there were expectations that I carried towards these people to show up for me in a way based off of our previous encounters in high school and maybe even early college before COVID happened that informed me that they cared about this relationship as much as I did, or at least I thought they did, right? And so obviously when stuff hits the fan, everything's going on, there's a lot going on, and not hearing from them, that hurt me deeply because I genuinely cared about that relationship, cared about that person, and cared about the foundation that was planted there. And so it didn't hit me until later on, having conversations with my mentor and coach at the time, where he reminded me that relationships have seasons. And he really challenged me to look deep into perhaps what was really frustrating me about it. What was I expecting from it? And then really leaning into listening to what God was really telling me regarding my relationships, regarding the people around me. And I remember having a week to think about that, coming back, and just the wisdom that he spewed, man. Just relationships have seasons. Sometimes the season is up and it's time to move forward. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. That was such a word that I needed in my heart in such a time that I still carry to this day and help other people to understand in regards to their relationships, because it was something that set me free from a lot of the expectations that I carried around for other people. And I was extremely disappointed in that season because there's a lot that I wanted out of those people, out of those relationships that I wasn't getting. And I had finally took inventory rather. And man, I really felt some type of way, but we all have those experiences, right? We can go on and on, have stories for days about disappointment, even my own about rejection. I've shared that quite a few times on this channel. Experiencing disappointment, thought it was going one way, rejected, didn't happen, and your boy was hurt, took it personal. Tears, frustration, confusion. Why me? Why did this happen? Was I not enough? Like all these different things that happened in the spur of the moment. Being rejected. And that wasn't the first time, right? I mean, I can go back. I mean, again, just stories on stories, being ghosted. Like that one was a level of disappointment because everything just got shut off and I never got an explanation. I never heard from that person again. And it bothered me. And it really, really was something that crushed me to my core as a growing young man at the time. And again, I just really think it's important when we look at all the stories and all the experiences that we've had with disappointment to really understand that is something that we can't avoid. And as much of a emotional pain that disappointment can bring, I think it's up to us to be willing to look at those experiences and ask ourselves, what is this disappointment that I'm experiencing perhaps teaching me? What can I look towards in the midst of this, depression? What can I look towards in the midst of this disappointment that is actually possibly going to be life-giving. Maybe not in this immediate moment, but in the future. And we really have to take the opportunity to just be honest with ourselves. And a lot of the disappointments that we carry, and I think sometimes the disappointment that we just have packed in our suitcase of life is something that's weighing us down more and more. The more we're disappointed, the more we're let down, the more people don't show up for us, the more people don't do certain things for us that we wish they did. Like, we kind of invite that on to ourselves, because in a lot of ways we just have yet to really be honest about the current standing of the relationship. We have yet to really be honest about how we legitimately feel as a result of somebody doing something towards us we didn't like, or not doing something towards us that we wish we wanted. Maybe unmet expectations in the process, right? Like, there's just so many things that we have to actually sit down with ourselves and question, grow curious, and be honest and say, what am I expecting here that I'm not getting? What am I wishing from this person that I'm just simply not being provided? What was my envision for this relationship? What was my outcome? What was what I wanted? What happened? What's the reality of it? And how can I move forward from there? So this entire conversation for the rest of the time, we're going to just shift over to some text that's really going to help us navigate through disappointment in a healthier way. Now that we kind of understand that disappointment is just unavoidable, because we're humans, imperfect, and anytime imperfection is invited into something that on its own entity is a beautiful thing, man, there's so much that can go wrong. And just as much as you've been disappointed, I have disappointed others. You have disappointed others. We've all participated in that. And so because this is something that's recurring, how do we deal with it? How do we navigate it in a healthy way? And I kind of want to start with John chapter 20. John chapter 20 may be a familiar text to some of you, but obviously this is the scenery of the disciples coming to Jesus's tomb and discovering that the tomb is empty. Okay. And this is really, really important, because I think this is going to address first and foremost the disappointment that we experience with God. And because that's a real thing. Like, disappointment doesn't just happen with, certain achievements that didn't happen, goals that weren't reached, certain desires that weren't fulfilled, expectations that weren't met with ourselves or with others. But I mean, first and foremost, man, we just got to be honest that there are moments where we're disappointed with God. We are disappointed that God did not show up in a specific way. We're disappointed that God did not come through in a manner that we would have wished. We're disappointed that God did not really answer a prayer in the manner in which we prayed it. I envisioned that, God, I prayed about this relationship. I prayed about this person. I prayed that this person was the right one. I prayed, I fasted, I did all the right things. And yet, how can I do all that? And then this is the result, where the relationship didn't make it. We were broken up. I was rejected. I was heartbroken. This relationship didn't go to marriage. This relationship went to marriage, but the marriage didn't last and it dissolved rather quickly. How? I prayed for this job. I prayed for this business. I prayed for all these things. I did what you said, or at least I thought I did. And this is the outcome that just doesn't match it. Like, how do I deal with that? And I think first and foremost, before we even dive into the nuances of this text, I think it's important to admit in our relationship with God that we are disappointed with God. And it's not necessarily to move in an arrogant way, to raise our fist at God as if we know better type of disappointment. It's more of just acknowledging what we feel, acknowledging the emotions that we're experiencing, acknowledging that this sucks. And this is a deep sadness that I have, and it's directed at God because, well, I prayed for it. I asked for it. I thought God promised it to me, and he just really didn't show up in the way that I envisioned him to. And I want you to hopefully catch on to some of these words I'm using, because I think this John chapter 20 text really hits home on maybe what is actually the rooted issue behind the disappointment that we experience, that we might share with God and in our relationship with him vertically. So I want you to check out the first few verses of this chapter. That reads this from the NLT version. Y'all know I'm bringing my Life Application Bible into the mix of this. It says this: early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. She said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. And Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed, for until then they still didn't understand the scriptures that said Jesus must rise from the dead. Then they went home. Okay, so that's the first 10 verses. I'm not going to read the whole chapter there, but it's really beautiful setting because in the context that's happening, Mary Magdalene is coming to the tomb, and in cultural context, and of course from the context clues of the other gospels that were given, she's coming with spices, y'all. In this cultural context, she's coming with spices. This is to bring a fragrance. This is oils and fragrances, obviously to, celebrate, or not even necessarily just to celebrate, to mourn the loss of a loved one, the loss of someone that was loved. In this culture, this is just the process of grieving. They're going to the tomb and they're giving fragrances. The body is probably rotting at this point, is what they're expecting, especially in the manner in which Jesus died. Like they're like, yo, this is going to be pretty rough, right? So they're expecting to encounter a dead Jesus. They're expecting to encounter the same version of Jesus they saw on the cross, taken down from the cross, wrapped in linen clothing, placed in the tomb on Friday. Okay. So they're coming to the tomb, and the tomb is rolled away. Stones rolled away. Obviously, in other gospels, we read angels approach them. The one whom you looking for, he's not here. He is risen. But in John's specific writing, it's so interesting. The tomb is rolled away and they recognize it's empty. And obviously, there's a lot happening emotionally in this space. They go and get the other disciples come, and so on and so forth. Here's the biggest thing that I want to get to you that I think is very heavily implied in this text. Mary Magdalene is approaching the tomb, expecting Jesus to show up in a way that he is not. There is an expectation to encounter a dead Jesus, but yet Jesus is risen. So because Jesus is not in the position that Mary Magdalene expected him to, there's different chaotic responses that start happening. Okay. And it's not all the way yet to a place where they're like, oh my goodness, this is true. He said it. He's risen. It's more of perhaps even putting our feet in the shoes of the disciples. They're probably thinking, well, they might have actually taken the body. I mean, Jesus was a very controversial figure, still is the most controversial human to ever exist in the history of humanity. And they're probably thinking that his body was taken. Like the Roman government did something with his body. So there's a lot of fears that are happening in this context that is informing them based off of them not encountering Jesus the way that they expected him to. And I think when we first come to dealing with disappointment and experiencing disappointment with God, whether it was something you prayed for, something you asked for, something you desired God to show up in, if you pay attention close enough, there's a lot of times we're quick to rush and say, God promised us something that wasn't really a promise that came from the scriptures in and of itself, but it's more of, I really wanted this. I really desired this. I really want marriage. I really want a family. I really want this job. I really want this business. I really want to insert whatever desire you have. For me, I really wanted to go play professional basketball. And God not answering that prayer, there were parts of me that obviously grew in places of frustration because it was something I really wanted. But I had to actually really get to a place of asking myself, yeah, it's what I wanted, but is that what God promised? Is this really what God said he was going to give me? Was this really something that God instructed me and led me to actually pursue? Or was this really just me? Was this really just a desire I wanted and I tried to wrap God around it? Was this really just an expectation that I put on God that God never approved of because this was never something God actually willed for my life? And I think when it comes to, especially us as believers, man, it's so easy for us to just throw God on everything. right? It's just so easy for us to think that we're actually always hearing God talking to us audibly or dropping promises in us spiritually. God said he was going to do this for me. God said he was going to do that for me. Maybe it was more from sermons and messages that we've heard where people are always talking about what God said. God told me to tell you. God told me to tell you this and that. And so we all are in some way, shape, or form, especially in the American church, we can easily be conditioned into this thinking process of a right now God. God is about to do it right now. God is about to do it right now. Your debt, God is about to clear today. You know, your future spouse gonna show up on your front door today. And, you know, we miss out on the God of process. We actually don't encounter or see God in the perspective of process. We just see him in the manner of everything has to happen right now. And I think that bleeds into some of the expectations that we put in on God too, because we're promised all these things if we just keep showing up to church and we keep tithing and we keep doing this, keep doing that. All these promises that people say are going to come your way if you just keep doing it. And in reality, we rob ourselves of just simply experiencing God. And in the process of robbing ourselves of just simply experiencing God and seeing Jesus himself as the blessing, we treat him as a genie. We treat him as the cash cow. We treat him as the one that we come to when we are in need of something. And then when he gives it, we don't really have a need for Jesus because we then put our trust back into the material things, the statuses that God ultimately may have allowed us to have. And so when those expectations go unmet, what you really have to ask yourself is, even though this is maybe what I was expecting God to do, what I wanted God to do, or how I wanted God to do it, is this actually where I can find him? Am I looking for Jesus in the wrong places? Right? Because sometimes you can be looking for God to show up in a specific area in your life, and he's not even anywhere near there. Like I was really looking for God to show up in my basketball career. Like I was really looking for God to show up and giving me a professional basketball contract. He never did it. He never did it. And the longer that I kept looking there, the longer I kept seeking God there, and I kept getting hit with these walls of frustrations. I kept getting hit with wall after wall after wall. No after no after no. Tryout after tryout after tryout that went well, but didn't never resulted in a scholarship, never resulted in something progressing forwardly. Like I continuously looked for God in a place that he just wasn't there. And that's a hardcore truth that we have to actually address, is the fact that perhaps what we have to deal with when it comes to disappointment is sitting down and really asking ourselves, I know this is where I want God to show up, but is this really where God is? I know I want God to show up in this specific way. I'm expecting God to show up in this specific way. But is that really how God is going to show up? Is that really what God has communicated to me he's going to do? Or is this just more of me, more of my own want, more of my own desire? And then as a result of that not being filled, I then blame God. Well, God, you said. Well, no, did he? Did he really say that? Or is that just us trying to project onto God what our desires are from places of insecurities, from places of greed, from places of just selfishness and ego, and actually having to come to Jesus, have a come to Jesus moment and say, yo, I was really expecting you to show up in a specific way, but I don't really think that was something you promised me. I don't really think that was something you really confirmed with me, that this is what you were wanting to do. I know this is what I wanted to do, but clearly there were some other plans that you've had, because every time I kept trying to go my way, nothing really ever got done. Nothing ever really got accomplished. I never really actually arrived at a place of peace. I was always at a place of furiosity. I was always at a place of anger. I was always at a place of struggle and of great contempt and tension. And so when I look at this, John chapter 20, it just screams to me that oftentimes when it comes to feeling disappointed with God, we are expecting God to show up in a way that he himself has never really communicated he was going to show up in. And we end up looking for him in places he's not, or we expect him to show up in a specific way that we envisioned in our minds, And when he shows up completely differently, we convince ourselves that can't be God. But what we do is we box him in to a timetable. We box him into a specific vision that we had in mind. Hey, I'm praying this prayer. And as I'm praying this prayer, this is how I'm envisioning you answering this prayer. But God could still answer the prayer. It's just not in the manner that you envisioned it. And so now you're frustrated. And you're convinced that the prayer that was answered can't be of God. When in reality it is, and it can be. Truth is, he probably has already answered it. It just isn't in the manner that you like it. And so that's the first thing that we really have to deal with when it comes to disappointment. And especially in the 3 levels of relationship that we discuss over here, relationship with God, yourself, and others. When it comes to relationship with God, we have to genuinely ask ourselves, is this something that God promised me, or is this something that I really wanted from God that God hasn't really aligned with? Because there's something else to it. There's more to it. What I'm asking God for isn't because I actually want to honor the kingdom and uplift the kingdom with my life. It's really because I feel that if I have it, then I actually mean something. Like if I have that marriage, if I have that family, if I have that car, if I have that house, if I have that extra money or that pay increase or that raise, that actually is going to give me room to feel more important, to feel more valued, to fulfill this insecurity that I have in me, where I feel as though I'm not man enough if I am not able to provide for my family financially. And I think those are the things that we really have to grow curious of, because truth be told, man, anytime we're asking God for certain things, you have to also be curious as to what is pushing you to ask God for that thing. And if it's coming from a place of insecurity, if it's coming from a place of feeling inadequate, if it's coming from a place of comparison, then oftentimes not only is God not really going to give that to us, but it further proves to God, honestly, why we actually aren't ready for the very thing that we're asking for. Because where it's coming from isn't from a place of stability, isn't from a place of consistency, isn't from a place of actually knowing that we don't need those things to define our value. And so sometimes that's why God delays it. That's why God he's not even interested in giving that to you, because it's just going to destroy you. It's going to ruin you even greater. And then here's the greater kick out of it, is that oftentimes we still go after it, don't we? We still go after it. We still pursue it. We still try to make it happen on our own force and our own will. And hey, guess what? There are some cases where it happens. You know, you created that whole job. You created that whole business. You created all that. And so you just go with it. And you think God's in it because you've got raises. You've got more money. You've got more opportunities. You've got more status. You've got more stuff. And it's like, but God's nowhere in the midst of that. And anything God does not bless, the flesh actually wants to try to take. Anything the Holy Spirit does not give permission to, the flesh desires to try to steal. And you will try to put yourself in those positions instead of allowing God to elevate you in those positions. And I think what frustrates us most is the fact that with God, we've got to go at his pace. Whereas if we try it our way, we can go right now. We can do it right now. We can have a microwave-like process. And I think hopefully what we're getting out of this so far is that we just know it's not worth it. Like, that's really not where the life is. Because anything that we try to force to have requires us to step out of God's will to have it. And if we have to step out of God's will to have it, we have to remain out of God's will to keep it, which means we really don't have the presence of God with us, which really means we aren't succeeding. And how crazy is it that we fool ourselves into thinking we're succeeding because our status looks good, but the presence of God is missing? And that's a dangerous place to be. And so that's like the rabbit trail that we can ultimately find ourselves in when we were talking about disappointment and experiencing that with God. But that's the first thing I want you to understand when it comes to this conversation, is that you have to ask yourself, is this something God really wanted for me? Or was this something that I really want and I just really want God to bless because I know I'll benefit greatly from this? But that's not really the case. And we know we're capable of playing the Christianese game too, right? We can figure out a way to color code it and put God and Jesus glitter all over it and use all kinds of scriptures to try to use and manipulate our way into getting what we want. But just because you're able to quote scripture and reference it back and all those kinds of things doesn't always mean that's what God is saying. If there's one thing I've learned in this early stage of living so far, is that I know that there are times where I feel as if I'm understanding what God is saying. But then I later realize, I missed it. Like I think I know what I'm saying. I think I know what God is saying, but I don't think I was actually hearing him. Because he might communicate something one way and I'll receive it as, oh, you're giving me permission to do this. But then when I go do it and it doesn't, it just, everything goes wrong. Nothing goes right. His presence isn't there. Nothing goes right. Then it's like, oh, that's not what you were saying. Yeah, I kind of thought that's what you meant. Nah. No, I just realized that I have to be more cautious, more slow, to really discern, okay, one, is this really what God is telling me? And two, am I willing to be patient enough to understand deeper of what he's meaning by what he's saying instead of just taking what he's saying at face value? And I think sometimes that's where disappointment slides in. Well, God, you said, but is that what he meant? I don't know. I think that's always a struggle, and that's always a place of tension. So that's the first thing I want you to really understand when it comes to dealing with disappointment and experiencing that. Okay. There are some things that you're expecting or some things that you may believe that God promised you, but that isn't what God promised you. That isn't what God meant by what he said. That isn't what God was communicating. And we have to just be willing to be honest and come to that terminology. Like, dang, God, I was wrong. I was wrong. I really wanted that. I really thought that would speak more to me, who I am, who I want to be. And truth be told, it really didn't have much to do with you. I just knew that you're the person to come to and to pray to when it comes to wanting these things. And you weren't really in that. And I think we just have to really be honest about that. And I think that helps us overcome those emotions that we experience with disappointment, where we feel God let us down. Because ultimately when it comes to having a relationship with God, it's not that he let us down. Oftentimes when we're feeling some type of way towards God, all the time, it's us. It's never him, especially when we actually put into the proper perspective the character of God. It's never him. It's always us. What keeps us from actually pursuing after God, staying with him, being in relationship with him, is never him. It's always us. It's always our own issues. It's always our own ego and pride and selfishness that steps in the way. And I think once we get to a place where we're recognizing, I really don't know as much as I thought I did. I definitely don't know more than what God knows. And I definitely feel like there's been more parts of me that has been trying to manipulate my desires into God's will instead of just going where God's will is, just walking in God's will for my life. Yeah, I think that could solve quite a bit of disappointment feelings. But outside of that, then we go into dealing with the relationship with yourself aspect. Okay. And this is why we want to go in this order, because hopefully as you go through this conversation, you're going to see there's a starting point to dealing with this disappointment that gives us a guide to dealing with disappointment with ourselves and with others effectively. So of course we got to start with God, right? God knows how we feel. God allows us to express our emotions, and it's in the midst of expressing those emotions, God gives us some pretty tough truths that we have to come to grips about, to be honest with, in order to move appropriately and effectively with ourselves and with others in the process. But when it comes to dealing with the disappointment with yourself, there's a lot of guilt and shame that comes along that, right? There's a lot of moments and thinking processes where we feel we're a failure. We no longer just say this was a mistake we made. Okay. We now begin to label ourselves as the mistake. This isn't something no longer that just happened to me. Now I begin to believe that this pain is telling me I'm worthless. I'm of no value. I'm actually giving permission to the trauma that I experienced in my childhood to redefine me as a human being. And I'm giving it the power to tell me who I am and who I'm not. To convince me that the trauma that I experienced was all my fault. The abuser gets no blame. The perpetrator gets no blame. It's all on me. Like, all of this in one way or another starts with disappointment. It's not to say that disappointment is the end all be all, but it definitely starts there, right? That definitely can conflate different areas of frustration, different areas of feeling valueless, worthless, let down, led astray, in shambles, feeling guilty, feeling shameful, feeling as if there is no value attributed to you. And I want to talk to you for a second because 2 Samuel chapter 9, I believe, is a space that we can actually really find ourselves in as we're wrestling with disappointment and feeling disappointed with ourselves. Because in this writing is the story of Mephilbosheth. In this particular text, though, when we come to 2 Samuel, Saul has died. So has Jonathan, his son. David is now on the throne. And by this time, he has now been king and is now declared king over both Judah and Israel. So at this point, there's still one unified nation of people. And David is actually still reflecting the heart of God, even in the midst of all that Saul tried to do to him, all the destruction that Saul tried to bring upon him. He is actually looking to still honor the house of Saul. So he's like, yo, who's left in the family of Saul that I could invite to my table? And Mephibosheth comes up in the conversation. And I just want you to just listen into this description here, because I think this is going to just speak so much volumes to perhaps some of you who may be feeling as if, due to your past, due to your experiences, due to what has happened to you, that you have become disqualified and you have become less than, of no value, to add to yourself, to the lives of others around you. There's a lot of unworthiness that you're wrestling with, lack of value that you're wrestling with. You're so disappointed with yourself that it's hard to move forward. It's hard to actually live forward. And I think this is going to speak life to you. So I want you to catch this. I'm going to start in verse 3. Okay. In 2 Samuel 9, he says this: the king then asked him, is anyone still alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them. Ziba replied, yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He is crippled in both feet. Okay. I'm sorry. Jonathan's son, not Saul. I did mention Saul earlier. It's Jonathan. Where is he? The king asked in verse 4. In Lodibar. Ziba told him, at the home of Machir, son of Amiel. Now, and just for some nerd out context, Lodibar, the name Lodibar, which is the name of this town, this place, is actually means nothing. It means nothing. Like literally, there's nothing. There's nothing to it. Nothing. And this is going to mean something here in just a few moments as we come across Mephibosheth and some of his responses. So verse 5, so David sent for him and brought him from Machir's home. His name was Mephilbosheth. He was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. When he came to David, he bowed low to the ground in deep respect. David said, greetings, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth replied, I am your servant. Don't be afraid, David said. I intend to show kindness to you because of my promise to your father, Jonathan. I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table. Mephibosheth bowed respectfully and exclaimed, who is your servant that you should show such kindness to a dead dog like me? I just want to pause here for a second. So if you're unfamiliar with the context to Mephibosheth, we actually get this context to how he becomes crippled earlier in the writings of the Samuel understandings of the Samuel scriptures. When we actually go to 2 Samuel chapter 4, this is the context of Mephibosheth's crippling. This is what it says. I'm going to start at verse 4. Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephilbosheth, who was crippled as a child. He was 5 years old when the report came from Jezreel that Saul and Jonathan had been killed in battle. When the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up and fled. But as she hurried away, she dropped him, and he became crippled. And it is in this very understanding of his crippledness that we start to kind of point the pieces together of perhaps why Mephibosheth would even consider himself as a dead dog, worthless, valueless, of nothing. And it's all because of his current physical condition. He's lame in both of his feet. He's crippled. And it wasn't even his fault. He was being carried by somebody who was in a hurry, who was fleeing. And in the process of running, dropped him. And he ultimately is seemingly paying a consequence for the decision of someone else who picked him up and dropped him. And maybe that could be a story that is reflective of your own life, where you're looking back and you're looking at some things, some experiences that you've had where people dropped you, people mishandled you, and in the process you were hurt. You were hurt because somebody else did not handle their own business, did not handle themselves properly, probably were on the run in a hurry, running away from something, and in the process you got caught in the crossfires, and it hurt you greatly. I mean, when you think about your parents, when you think about people who may not have shown up for you who were supposed to, when you think about your childhood, when you think about friends and loved ones, when you think about all of these different expectations that we've had for people who, due to their authoritative positioning in our lives, they were supposed to be that person for us, and yet they didn't. And it was their lack of ability to show up for us, to handle us properly, that hurt us in the end. And we've been walking around here crippled spiritually, because it's been hard to let go of that, because there's just been this expectation. Well, this was supposed to be my dad. This was supposed to be my father. This was supposed to be my mother. This was supposed to be my caregiver. And they were never around. They were never here. All they did was send gifts, but I couldn't even get any time with them. You know, I remember being disappointed egregiously by my caregiver. I remember being disappointed by somebody who I never thought would stab me in the back. They mishandled me. They didn't really know what they were holding on to. They didn't really know who I was or what I was dealing with. And they just dismissed me. And it hurt greatly. You know, when you think about all the deep wounds and the emotional experiences, some that go as far as molestation, some that go as far as being sexually assaulted, some that go as far as just simply being betrayed by family, being betrayed by a significant other, being betrayed by a spouse. Like, yo, this stuff runs so deep. And to your understanding, it's not even your fault. They just simply mishandled you and dropped you in the process. And I think it's easy to then come to a place that Mephilbosheth arrives at, where now that this is his condition, he begins to believe that the mistake of being dropped is now something that plays a role in who he is. So he's no longer just looking at himself as somebody who's crippled and is integrating that into his reality. He's actually assuming that because this has happened to him, this is who he is. Well, I was dropped and crippled, so therefore I'm lame, I'm of no value, I'm a dead dog. Speaking negatively over himself, that negative self-talk gets real massive and real loud when we're actually dealing with a lot of these wounds, when we're actually dealing with a lot of these struggles. And when that negative self-talk gets extremely loud, it gets harder to hear the perspectives that are actually life-giving, because the way that our brain functions, the things that we rehearse ultimately continue to show up at greater lengths, at greater levels. The more and more that we rehearse it, the more and more our neurons literally wire. Our brain is literally rewiring our nervous system to adjust to specific things that we're speaking over ourselves, or that we're allowing other people to speak in our vicinity. And we hear it long enough, now we begin to take that on as a foundational belief. And then when that locks in as a foundational belief, anytime we try to think differently outside of that foundational belief, we're going to constantly run into it. So when you are speaking negatively over yourself and you're considering yourself to be worthless, valueless, I'm nobody, you begin to continuously refer to yourself as something that's negative. When somebody comes across and meets you and they begin to speak positive, life-giving things into you, the reason why you can't receive it isn't because you don't understand what they're saying in its literal form. You literally understand what they're telling you, that you're valuable, that you're loved, that you're wanted, but it's hard to receive because you have a foundational programming instituted into your thinking that is literally telling you that, no, that's not true. Every time you try to stretch your thinking and you try to step outside the box, no, that's not true. Why? Because you've been conditioned to believe a certain way about yourself all this time. So instead of us trying to pile on new programmings and new beliefs on top of old beliefs, thinking that that's just going to drown it out, the way that we should do it is actually going back and readdressing those old beliefs and allowing ourselves to separate and sever from them as a means of getting to the new beliefs and implementing that into our programming. And that comes with a new pattern of rehearsal. That comes with rehearsing new things. That comes with actually running into challenges where we'll go a while, but repeating certain affirmations or things over ourselves. And then we'll have a day where we just don't even see it. And that's that old programming still trying to make its way there. But we counter that by reminding ourselves of who we are in God. We remind ourselves of our value. We remind ourselves of the gifts and talents that we carry, that we truly now see and believe. And it's a process to rid of such thinking, such old thinking, to really walk in the new way of thinking. Scripture, Romans 12, tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Well, the transformation of the renewing of our mind starts with what we are rehearsing, what we are allowing ourselves to see and digest through our eyes, through our ears, and allowing that to become something that's repetitive. And it doesn't mean that we won't have struggles along the way to now allowing this new programming to become default settings. We will. It's just in the midst of those struggles. And when that old programming is butting its head, we begin to counter it. We now have something in hand that we're able to counter that attack with. And that's with the new thoughts, the new thinking, the new identity that we're literally trying to rewire our brain to believe by first addressing the old beliefs, understanding why those old beliefs don't work with new perspectives that we're able to attach certain memories to those old beliefs with. And in that window, we're able to actually transition into a different, deeper perspective that gives us a refreshing outlook on it that allows us to live beyond the experience that we had. I said a lot there, but I just want you to understand that a lot of what Mephilbosheth is experiencing is a reflection of you, because there's things that have happened to you that you've just literally identified yourself as. And I want you to pay attention to how this works out for Mephilbosheth, even though he's considering himself a dead dog, even though he doesn't see himself as valuable. You're like, bro, how can make this, speak plain English? How do I make this work? Watch this. In order to deal with disappointment with yourself, you've got to follow what Mephilbosheth does here. Okay. Look at what verse 11 says. Ziba replied, "Yes, my lord the king. I am your servant, and I will do all that you have commanded." And from that time on, Mephilbosheth ate regularly at David's table like one of the king's own sons. Mephilbosheth had a young son named Micah. From then on, all the members of Ziba's household were Mephibosheth's servants. And Mephilbosheth, who was crippled in both feet, lived in Jerusalem and ate regularly at the king's table. Look at verse 9, because I did skip a couple verses. Verse 9 says, "Then the king summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and servants are to farm the land for him to produce food for your master's household. But Mephilbosheth, your master's grandson, will eat here at my table." Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants, right? So Mephilbosheth is questioning basically why is he getting all this? He doesn't feel he deserves it. He doesn't see it, right? I don't get it. In Mephibosheth's mind, I'm a dead dog. I'm nothing. Hence Lodabar, living in Lodabar. That is identical to how he feels about himself. He feels like he's nothing. Well, what in the world are we doing here? But that doesn't stop him from still getting all that King David desired to give him, which was everything that belonged to Saul's family. Like, hey, this is yours. This is your treasure. This is what belongs to you. And what Mephibosheth does, despite what he says in verse 8, considering himself a dead dog, by the way this chapter ends, he is sitting at the king's table. In other words, he is actually allowing himself, even in the negative self-talk, even in the negative outlook he has of himself, even in the disappointment, even in the unmet expectations, even in the failure he feels, even in the valuelessness and worthlessness that he's experiencing, he still came to the table and he still has a seat at the table. So in other words, what I'm communicating to you is that you don't have to wait till you feel worthy and valuable to receive how God is saying to you, what God is saying to you, what God is promising you, what God speaks over your life. What Mephibosheth's story gives us permission to do is put ourselves in position to still sit at the table with all of those feelings and allow the very essence of God's presence, of God's word, of God's promises, of what God says over us in the midst of what we're feeling to speak to us, that actually is then going to transform the way that we think, that then influences the way we feel, that then allows us to live forward. So what we have to do in order to deal with disappointment with ourselves is to stop focusing so much on our own insufficiencies and still say, despite what I feel, I'm receiving what God has promised me. I'm receiving what God has given me. I am going to choose to still come to God's presence, to lean into what God has to say about me, because even though I don't feel worthy right now, even though I don't feel valuable right now, even though I don't feel like I deserve it right now, I know that what God has given me has never been predicated on what I've earned, because I cannot earn God's love. I cannot earn God's peace. I cannot earn anything God has already freely given me. I just have to accept it. That's the beautiful thing about rocking with Jesus, is that I just have to be willing to accept it. Like Jesus never took into account my condition. Like Jesus never took into account what I was feeling. It's nothing new to him. He knows this. And the invitation is still extended. And it's still extended to you. So despite how you're feeling, despite where the rabbit trail has led you in your thinking and your emotions towards yourself as a result of an initial experience with disappointment, where somebody who was supposed to love you didn't show up, where somebody who was supposed to care for you didn't show up, where somebody who was supposed to be all that they were supposed to be wasn't it. The expectations were unmet. The mom failed you. Dad failed you. Boyfriend failed you. Girlfriend failed you. Husband failed you. Wife failed you. Yep. It's real. It's all real. And as a result of those failures, you have consequently believed over time that because this is what happened to you, this is now who you have to be. A failure. It's not that you've been failed. It's just now you are a failure. Right? We have now conflated, we've now conflated our experiences and allowed it to create shame in us. And my encouragement to you is that you don't have to rest in a space of the cycle and recycle of disappointment and shame. What we can do is allow ourselves to let go of those expectations, let go of those people who were supposed to show up for us in a unique, specific way, by acknowledging that they didn't have the capacity, by acknowledging that they didn't have all that they had or what they needed in order to do that for us, by being honest about the fact that we feel some type of way as a result of them not being for us what we wanted them to be, what we hope for them to be, and then being willing to move on by leaning closer into what God has to say, by receiving the already blessings that God has given, by receiving what God has already promised, that you already have all spiritual blessings in heavenly places, that while you were a sinner, he died for you. Let that trip you out. At the simple fact that salvation, the greatest gift known to humanity, was given to you, and it wasn't given to you based on anything you could do. Guess what? You were never holding up God. So how could you let him down? Right? You were never holding him up. And he was never looking at you like, you better not drop me. Oh, you better not. God don't even move that way. A lot of times that's our own thinking. And it's the shame that has crept in to the emotions that we've been feeling about something that didn't happen the way we wanted it to or that we expected it to. And I just want to encourage you that the strongest way to deal with disappointment with yourself is allowing yourself to receive what God has already given, what God has already promised, and knowing that you can do nothing to earn it. You don't have to wait to become valuable according to external validation and then according to external people. You don't have to wait until you feel like you're worthy enough. There's no such thing. It's when we come to God that we then are able to be informed of how valuable we are. It's when we come to God that we're able to be strengthened in the value God has already designed us in. And proof of it is him going to the cross for us. And if we're willing to remind ourselves of that, it's going to help us conquer those moments when we feel so disappointed with ourselves that we don't know how we're going to get it going. And here's another thing too that I really want to share with you, because some of you are dealing with disappointment too. And I've had some recent calls over the last couple of weeks with people who are dealing with disappointment and shame and guilt regarding themselves because they feel that, man, I should just be doing more. I should just be doing better. That's where the disappointment comes from, right? I should just be doing better. But allow me to encourage you that it's hard to know how to do better when better wasn't presented in front of you. It's hard to actually know what to do when you didn't have an example, a healthy example on what to do from people around you who were before you. And some of these expectations that we put ourselves in to show up for certain people or to be a certain way, I'm always curious, and this is one of the repetitive questions I always ask people, like, who set that precedent? Who told you that that was something you had to show up as? Did they show up as that for you? And where did this expectation come from for you? Because oftentimes that expectation is unrealistic because we just never had that example in front of us. So I really want you to get to a place in this conversation where you're just slowly willing, if not quickly willing, to just let go of the expectations that you've had for yourself, that if we're being honest, are expectations that you don't really know how to live up to because there was nobody else in front of you who was able to show that to you. Now, that doesn't give us excuses to just continue to live in dysfunction, right? But what that does say is like, okay, now I understand that because what I'm trying to live up to, right? I may have an expectation to communicate healthily. I may have an expectation to love healthily. I may have an expectation to be there for other people around me, right? And the nuances in between that. Well, if people around you in your own household and how you grew up didn't communicate healthily, there was a lot of yelling and screaming. There was a lot of arguing. There was nobody wanting to sit down and understand. There was nobody willing to be curious enough to ask questions. Nobody was tender and patient enough to make room for you in your mistakes because you came from a place of perfectionism, because you came from a place where people expected you to be everything and do everything right the first time. And when you got it wrong, it was a whooping. It was being yelled at. It was being told you weren't enough. It was being reminded of your mistakes repetitively. You had to deal with the critical parent. You had to deal with the critical mom and dad. You had to deal with the critical siblings. And so it puts you in these pockets of pain and frustration and suffering, and something that was endless and never seeming to come to any kind of end. You were put in a position, unfortunately, due to people who were not equipped to deal with you, who were not equipped to love you properly, who were not equipped due to their own personal traumas and experiences and how it bled over into you. Like, yo, I'm telling you how we deal with a lot of these things. Yes, of course, we come to God. I just explained that. We just went through that, right? But also, and to that, I think there are some expectations with people that we just have to be willing to drop and say, you know what? I'm expecting some things from people that just don't even know how to give it. I'm expecting some things from people, and I've been mad at them for years, but they were never given the tools on how to show up in a manner that I needed them to. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, aren't you giving them an excuse, bro? Like, I'm not giving them a pass for not being what they were supposed to be. I'm not giving them a pass for who they were supposed to be now. But I just want you to consider that it's hard to expect a toddler to understand the value of the car keys that's in their hand. You know, when a toddler goes and picks up some car keys, they might play with it for a few seconds, but what they're going to do, toss it to the side because they're distracted by another toy, one of their favorite toys that's across the room. And we don't devalue the keys that the child drops because they went and played with a different block or a different toy. We just recognize, yeah, they just don't see it. They don't even know what they had in their hands. How could we be upset? How could we be upset? How could we be upset that they don't even know what they're like? We find ourselves getting. I remember this one time, man. Let me say it like this. I got a story time for y'all, and it's not even. It's gonna be a quick one. I remember being in the middle of a recording session, trying to get some stuff squared away. I was doing a little bit of a live or something like that, and I remember my nephew was going crazy. He was going ballistic. He's had some, some struggles with his behavior and his emotions and things of that sort. And so, everybody downstairs, the sister, his mama, my sister, his mama, and him going crazy downstairs. They arguing, yelling, yelling, yelling. He's crying, yelling, talking about what he's not going to do. He's all this, right? And so everybody's just passion is high in the air. So I get off the stream because I can't even focus. I can't even lock in. I go downstairs and I'm like, bro, what's up? Like, what is going on? Like, get your shoes on. It's time to go. And, he's just, nah, I'm not going to go. I don't want to go. This, that, and the third, right? And so now I'm starting to get like more amped up and frustrated, right? So I'm still trying to learn. And this is the process of learning it. Like, okay, I can't really match the energy. I got to lead, right? And sometimes leading it looks like moving about it in a different way, right? And not matching the energy in the room. But man, but I'm not there yet all the way, right? I'm not there yet all the way. So I'm building up this frustration. And so when I started walking towards him, and not to whoop him, I had no intentions on whooping him at all, and I didn't. Okay, because I mean, one, that's my nephew. I'm trying to do better. You know what I'm saying? That ain't even my lane anymore. There was a time where some of it was called for, but now I'm just choosing to do better. And so, you know what I'm saying? I approach him. He takes off running, and he's crying and he's mad and he's telling me what he's not gonna do. And so I catch him, and I lift him up. I'm carrying him back to the double doors that are by the dining table. And I gently set him on his feet. I get on his level and I said, bro, what is going on with you? What is this? Right? Like I'm able to catch myself like, bro, what is this? What is going on? We love you oh so dearly. And this is not okay. This is not how you deal with it. This is not okay. What is going on? What is up? And I kid you not, that ninja looked me dead in my face. And he was like, I don't even know. Bro, what's crazy is even doing all that I did in that moment, I never felt such an idiot in my life. To be so mad at this now, at this time, what was he? Maybe 5 years old, 6 years old, roughly. And him being so emotionally unstable. And then when I tell him to take some deep breaths, to calm down and tell me what's wrong, he can't even tell me. I have never felt more like an idiot in my life, because the anger and the frustration that was building up in me, that clearly was in the room as the sister and his mother were upset and they had some stuff to do, and he's in the way of it. All of us are moving in a very passionate way, all because there's a part of us that's expecting this child, to cooperate and know what's going on with him. But when you sit him down and you ask him directly, he can't even tell you. I don't know. Right? And then to later learn, this is what's even crazier, he was just hungry. I had never felt like such an idiot in my life. And I share that story because there are just so many parts of us, man, that carry these expectations silently. And when those expectations aren't met, especially by people who we're encountering as adults, and then they start responding as children, it gets us frustrated. And a lot of times they don't even know. Like it might even be a surface response, but deep down it's something different and something much bigger, and they don't even know. They're dysregulated, don't even know why. They're upset, mad, frustrated, don't even know why. They couldn't show up for you and they don't even know why. They couldn't even communicate to you healthily, they don't even know why. They couldn't love you properly, they don't even know why. And as we continue to grow in an information age, it's so much easier for us to get understanding on that stuff and have language for it. But the people that we are coming back and sharing this stuff to, they didn't have access to this stuff. And so parts of us has to learn to be willing to show grace to people who weren't able to show up for us in a way that we expected them to. And we're allowing ourselves to get mad at them and stay mad at them and stay unforgiving towards them because they didn't show up in a way that, if we're being honest, if we were to really take a step back, dang, bro, they just did not have the tools. They did not have the equipment. They did not have the context and the availability of stuff that like we do today. They just didn't have it. The way that they were raised, the way that they were challenged, the way that they were handled, people messed up too. And so this is what gives us grace to that and gives us information on how to move better beyond it and not continue to settle for such treatment, right? Now that we know better, now that we can have the language for it, we can show up differently, and it's all a process. But a lot of us are just mad and dealing with disappointment because there's a part of us that's continuing to hold on to a version of somebody that just simply doesn't exist, and people and being mad at people for not showing up when they never had the capacity to. They just didn't. They didn't. And we look like perhaps how I felt being upset at a child who was emotionally dysregulated, and when asking him what was wrong, he couldn't even tell me. Wow, how much of a dummy I feel for expecting this child to give me an answer of how he's feeling, and he don't even know. And here I am getting mad, ready to hand out whoopings and L's. And it's like, bro, he don't even know. And I think sometimes that's how we move. And I think hopefully what I'm expressing to you in this conversation is that we have to get to a place where we're willing to just sit down and be very patient, grow in patience, and considerate of the context to why people weren't able to be for us what we hoped they could have been, or what we needed them to be, what we wanted them to be. And it doesn't mean that I give them an excuse. It just puts it in the context. And now that we have better understanding, okay, there's some deeper things that have to be addressed in order for us to actually get what we're both looking for here, instead of just allowing anger and frustration and anxiety to just run rampant and destroy the relationships that we really want to cultivate. And so my encouragement to you is to lean into God. My encouragement to you is, in the midst of feeling valueless and worthless, that you still choose to approach the King's table and take a seat, because it's for you. Regardless of how you feel, that seat is for you. Proof of it is what he did on the cross. And when we remind ourselves of what God did for us, who God is and who God is for us, despite what we feel, it's then that we're able to look beyond our own insufficiencies and see his glory. And when we're able to get a glimpse of his glory beyond our insufficiencies no longer have control over how we approach God. We just know that we can still come to the throne. We can still come to the throne. We can still come to him and rest in him. Okay. But that's not the last part of dealing with disappointment, right? We've dealt with dealing with disappointment with God, and dealing with disappointment with ourselves and how to operate in it. And on top of that, importance in that section too is that we just learn to have grace for ourselves. It's a process, right? But just know that when dealing with disappointment with ourselves, especially if it's a specific space that we've been in for a while, where negative self-talk is just predominant, negative experiences have yet to be really integrated, we have to give ourselves patience and grace. All this grace that you want to give to other people, give it to you. Give it to you. Yeah, this is new for you. This is new. This is new. This is different. It's challenging. You're not used to it. It's painful. And it's a process worth going through. And we just got to be willing to be present in it. Give yourself grace. Give yourself grace and go one day at a time. Go one day at a time. When you're dealing with disappointment in yourself and you start to rethink or think to yourself that you are your mistakes, I want you to be reminded not just of what God says about you. I want you to take inventory and celebrate yourself. What are some gifts and talents that you have that makes you unique? That's something I answer in my journal every day. What is something unique about you that makes you special? I want you to focus on the talents. I want you to focus on the gifts. I want you to focus on the blessings. I want you to focus on the things that make you unique. Because this way, not only you're developing different relationships with praise and different relationship with celebration and acknowledgement and gratitude, but you're ultimately allowing yourself to not be so focused on what you may have felt like you failed to be or failed to have, or this perspective that you'll never get there because I'm always a failure. I'm always a pusher. I'm always this. I'm always that. We got to rid of that language using always and never in such negative experiences and being willing to lean into more of what God is speaking about us, more of what God says about us, and acknowledging that we've been through a lot. And a part of processing that and unpacking that is just giving ourselves time and being gracious and pouring and nurturing ourselves into a lane of love that allows us to live beyond the insufficiencies that we carry. And the biggest glimpse of that is being able to see what God sees in us. Okay. This last part is going to be phenomenal because now that we've kind of unpacked a little bit of detail about wrestling with disappointment with God, wrestling with disappointment with ourselves, and what it can look like to navigate through it in a biblical manner, I want you to also see how we can navigate the horizontal relationships and dealing with disappointment with others. And some of the things that we've already said might be repetitive in this section, but the biggest thing that I want you to get here is that dealing with disappointment with others requires a couple things. One, for us to be regulated and to learn how to self-regulate. When our emotions are out of control, we're feeling some type of way by somebody not doing what we thought they should have done or being what we hoped they could be, or a breakup, a rejection, somebody didn't show up on time as they said they would, somebody who didn't show up to a space like we thought they should, all these different kinds of expectations and assumptions that we might carry about the relationships that we have. We have to first learn how to self-regulate. Okay, this comes with breathing exercises, journaling. This comes with being able to regulate our body through workouts, exercises, walks, all these different kinds of things as a means to find methods to regulate, daily. Okay, like this is something that we implement into our routine, right? These things are allowing us to really, really operate in that, be connected to our bodies, and stay on top of those things. That's a quick application to start this off. But the biggest thing that I want you to really recognize too is that a part of having healthy relationships is we have to make room for disappointment. We have to make room for failure. Because again, what did we open this entire conversation saying? That relationships are filled with imperfect people. And if there's one thing that I've seen on repeat in relationships today, is that we have seemed to grow very, very, very impatient with mistakes. We've gone rogue in just understanding what it actually means to have a healthy relationship, to be forgiving, to be compassionate, to be empathetic, and to make room for somebody that we're connected with to disappoint us. And I know that sounds so weird because we don't want to be disappointed. But at the same breath, how unrealistic is it of us to expect somebody around us to be perfect? You haven't shown up in the way that you know you ought to show up every day. For your spouse, for your significant other, for your family. And so how crazy is it that we should expect them to do that for us when we haven't done that for them? Here's a greater example. Imagine if God did that to us. Just imagine, right? We fall short of his glory every day. Imagine God being like, man, nah, fam, you missed it. And because you missed it, you missed me. And we're done. Man, God is so amazing that he chooses to dwell within us knowing we're going to fail. So how much more are we to grow into this perspective of creating healthy relationships with people by making room for them to fail? Here's my scripture that I hope ties all of this together in a nice bow. We're going back to the New Testament. We're going back to John. Actually, we're going to start in Luke. Luke is actually where I think it explains it so well and so uniquely to me. And then, of course, we're going to go to John as well. So this is in the section of Peter denying Jesus. Okay. And this is going to speak volumes. And so I'm going to start at Luke 22, verse 54. So they arrested him and led him to the high priest's home, and Peter followed at a distance. The guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it, and Peter joined them there. A servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said, "This man was one of Jesus' followers." But Peter denied it. Woman, he said, I don't even know him. After a while, someone else looked at him and said, you must be one of them. No, man, I'm not, Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted this must be one of them because he is a Galilean too. But Peter said, man, I don't know what you're talking about. And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. And Peter left the courtyard, weeping bitterly. So, of course, in this context, we understand that Peter was predicted to deny Jesus 3 times by Jesus himself. And Peter, in his zealous love for him, nah, God, I'd never do that. Stop the cap. I'll never do that. And then here it is where Jesus is arrested and it came true. But this is what I really want you to catch throughout this entire text in this implicit speech is that Jesus predicted that Peter would deny him. Now, of course, this speaks to a prophetic thing. Okay. I think this also speaks to Jesus just understanding relationships, like just literally understanding the importance and showing us how important it is to make room for someone else's failure, to make room for others to disappoint you and not allow that disappointment to be so much that you allow it to sever the relationship to great degrees. This whole the Lord turned and looked at Peter thing, when I first read it, shocked me because I was like, yo, like imagine being close enough to him to where when he turned, he was able to look directly at your eyes, like direct eye contact. That's what the scriptures in its context in its original language, like when they're describing it, it's literally making eye contact. They made eye contact with each other. And it was in that moment that Peter recognized, oh my Lord. And what was his response? He wept bitterly. He felt immediate rushes, perhaps, of guilt and shame. Stuff that we just talked about earlier, right? Guilt and shame. He struggled with that. And Jesus calling it, Jesus predicting it, Peter still going through with it. Even when he was zealous and was convinced he wouldn't do it, he did it still. I just think Jesus shows us a phenomenal lesson that we have to make room for failure. And it comes with empathy. It comes with understanding the moment, understanding the situation. Like Jesus knew the pressure that was going to be applied on him and his disciples as a result of him being arrested. Jesus did not carry an unrealistic expectation on Peter to show up completely. He knew he was going to do that. And yet God's love for him never changed. And here's evidence of it. Let's go to John. Okay, this is going to be at the end of the book of John, the Gospel of John. This is going to be John chapter 21. I'm going to read a couple verses in the beginning of 21, and then I'm going to summarize it in the end. But look at this. This is actually when the disciples choose to go back to their fishing. Okay, a lot of them were fishermen, and this was kind of a symbolic gesture of them basically going back to life as they knew it before Jesus showed up, right? And so they go, they're out there catching no fish, right? And this is what it reads, starting at verse 4. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, fellas, have you caught any fish? No, they replied. Then he said, throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some. And if you remember, earlier on in the writing of the Gospels, this is exactly how they encounter Jesus at first. So Jesus is performing a repetitive miracle. But in this context, this seems to be a miracle that reminds them and confirms to them that he is indeed truly in front of them. He's resurrected. So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." This is how they knew. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. He wasn't waiting. Peter was running. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. Shout out to Jesus for having the very first fry. Fish. I can't even say it. Shout out to Jesus for having the first fish fry in the scripture, right? Verse 10, bring some of the fish you've just caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. So now I want to go into the later verses 15 through 17. Let's look at that. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." Now, of course, in the initial writing of this text, the love that Jesus is asking Peter of is not the same love that Peter responds to Jesus with. Jesus is trying to call Jesus is trying to call Peter up to an agape love, while Peter is only offering him a phileo love, a love of friendship. Agape being the love of God, unconditional, phileo, friendship. And after about 2 different times of Jesus simply inviting him to a different level of love, a higher level of love, and Peter only being able to give him a specific kind of love in this season, in this moment, the third time that Jesus asked this question and Peter answers the question, Jesus is now meeting Peter where he's at in the kind of love that Peter is looking to give. This does not mean that Jesus is aiming to just settle for any kind of love he can get as if he's just so desperate. I want you to hear that. Jesus is simply meeting Peter with what he can give now, knowing that the longer he walks with Peter, Peter is going to evolve and grow into the level of love he ultimately desires him to live at, a love that's unconditional and that's a reflective of God. And so this entire exchange screams to me that even in the midst of the denial that Peter operates in earlier on in the text that we read from Luke, it is here in this version of John's gospel that he's restored. He's restored. And it is in this restoration that we're reminded that Jesus makes room for our disappointment. He knows within the relationship that we carry with him individually, he knows that we're not going to be able to live up to everything that he's asking of us. He knows that there are going to be challenges. He knows that we're going to fall and make mistakes. He knows that we're not going to be able to uphold everything. And so when I reflect on our relationship with Jesus individually, how crazy is it that the same God, the God of the universe, Jesus, God in the flesh, died under Pontius Pilate, resurrected on the third day, appeared in front of 500, ascended to the right hand of the Father, the same Jesus that we are in relationship with. Isn't it crazy how the expectations that he doesn't carry towards us, we have the nerve to carry to other humans? Isn't that crazy? Like, when you really think about it, we carry the craziest expectations towards people to be everything for us. And yet God is looking at us like, yo, I don't do that for you. I don't do that towards you. No, you can't handle it. Because I know you're human. I know you're imperfect. I know you're not God. So why would I expect you to do God things as a human? Why would I expect you to live with a God-like capacity in your humanity? And I think that's something that we legitimately have to ask ourselves when it comes to placing unrealistic expectations on people. How wild is it of us to expect people to do things for us that God himself is like, yeah, fam, I don't even do that to you. I don't do that to you. I don't expect you to get everything right and to do everything right. And I get it too, man, because I think when we really dive into this conversation and we talk about making room for failure and making room for mistakes, I ain't even gonna hold y'all. Sometimes in my mind, when I first started catching on to this, what I think was presented as a struggle for me was like, oh man, bro, but like, I know that I've come from a background where perfectionism was something that was tough. It was a challenge, growing up in a household where, even though it was something that was repeated, that it wasn't expected to be perfect, it was a lot of times where I didn't feel as if I could celebrate certain wins around my parents, more specifically my mom, because it was like, well, every time I did, there was like some kind of criticism that was thrown away, right? It was never really fully celebrated and just acknowledged that something was passed, an assignment was passed, a test was passed, something was turned out to be a success. It was always, here's some critique that follows up. Here's some critique. Here's how you do it better. And it was always something that kind of transformed in my mind into this level of perfectionism where I felt like, dang, it doesn't matter what I do, it's never enough. And this is kind of what kept me from being able to even celebrate small wins that I experienced. I can remember winning a playoff basketball game and hitting a buzzer beater, and the next day at class and in school, kids were walking in the hallways and were just congratulating me and saying, what a game, and you played a wonderful game. And I couldn't even receive that because my immediate response was, I was just doing my job. I couldn't even celebrate it because there was so much ingrained in me from how I was raised, where I was always looking at things and saying, how could I have done it better? And it kept me from celebrating what was really there. And it kept me from, in a lot of ways, acknowledging that even though maybe something wasn't done all the way, there's still something that was done enough to celebrate. And I think in a lot of ways that can translate into relationships if you don't choose to address it and to heal it. I had to do legitimate work, and I still do it all the time. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier about celebrating and talking about wins and talking about what's unique about you that's special, because you're building a connection with celebrating what you already have without going to the lens of saying, I can do better, without going to the lens of dismissing what's already here in efforts of trying to think of what could be done differently or done more of. And I just think it's crazy, man, when you really think about relationships, when you really think about building them healthily, how often we deviate from responding to horizontal relationships in the way that our vertical relationship is set up. And sometimes, can I be honest too? This is going into a really, really deeper spectrum on this conversation. But, when you think about your relationship with your parents, when you think about your relationship in your childhood and in your household that you grew up in, a lot of times how we envision God is starting with those relationships that we had in the house with family. So no wonder it's hard for you to discern or see God as your father, because your earthly father was showing up for you in a way that wasn't helpful or didn't show up at all. So you see him as savior, but it's hard for you to see him as father because there's parts of you that are being robbed because of the lack your earthly father was walking in. When it comes to perfectionism, y'all, now, granted, I don't know if I've necessarily dealt with this to this extent in my own walk, but I know it's real. The simple fact that perfectionism can be such a strain on you as a child, where you felt there was nothing you could do that would ever be enough, that now when it comes to your experience and connection to your heavenly father, oh man, I just feel like if I get something wrong, God hates me, God is mad at me, and I don't feel enough. I feel inadequate. If I'm afraid of making a decision, I'm afraid of making the wrong decision. And it's more stemmed from the relationships I've had with other people horizontally and the trauma bonding or the traumas that have passed down or the wounds that have been experienced. And what I'm hopefully communicating to you is perhaps you can think of some things in your own lane that you're looking at and you're like, dang, that might be why I struggle there, because I remember this happening when I was a child, and I remember this happening when I was in adolescence. And how this shaped my cognitive framework to believe that this is how relationships are going to go. And this is why I have trust issues. And this is why, like, I hope you're able to see all that, because what I'm wanting to encourage you is that you cannot allow what other people did not have for you, or you cannot allow what other people were not to you, to rob you of an experience with the Father. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't allow what other people weren't able to be for you in your previous existences in earlier life and early. Let me change that up. I don't want to say that. Don't allow what people were not for you to dictate how your relationship with God ought to go. He's told us who he is. He's told us who he is. And in the process of receiving that, we know we got to work through some different systems and programmings that are going to help us unpack that stuff. 1000%. Right? That's what coaching and counseling and community, that's what all that's for. Therapy, 1000%. Right? God's with all of it. But I just don't want you to get to a place where you allow what other people weren't for you to keep you from a healthy relationship with your Father. And when you really grow curious into how some mannerisms you currently carry are impacting that, I want you to dive deeper. I want you to be gracious with yourself, compassionate with yourself, because this is the work that has to be done in order to not just continue to cultivate healthy relationship vertically with your Father, but as a result, create healthy relationships with yourself and with others in the end. And I think what John and Luke tell us through this experience of Peter denying Jesus and being restored is that we have to make room for disappointment. And the greatest way that we can do that is reflecting on our own relationship with the greatest relationship that we can carry with our Father, and saying, yo, you make room for my disappointments and failures, and your love doesn't switch up on me. You don't withdraw your love every time I make a mistake. You don't withdraw your love every time I do something that I'm not supposed to do. You don't withdraw your love every time I'm delaying obedience. You don't. Your love stays the same. And it's in that love that I'm able to grow in patience. And that's another tough part to this too, right? So a part of making room for failure in relationships is learning how to be patient with people, right? And allowing and being patient with God as he's being patient with them. Because sometimes we come to God and we're like, yo, Lord, why ain't they changing? I've been praying about this for months and ain't nothing clicked. But it's like, nah, fam. I think when they're doing the right things and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, a lot of this stuff is just process. It really is. It really is a game of process. And we have to be willing to submit to that process and trust God and be willing to be patient with God as he's being patient with those you're praying for, nurturing a healthy relationship along the way. So sometimes just simply learning how to deal with disappointment horizontally is not having too high of expectations, allowing people to show you who they are through their behaviors. So that way, based on what they do, you're able to gauge what you can expect from them. That's realistic, right? I think one of the things that I messed up on in previous relationships is expecting people to do things that I wanted so bad that came from places of insecurity and wanting attention. But, you know, things like, man, I expected to hear from somebody every day. I expected to be talking to somebody that I was interested in. If I was pursuing you, yeah, I want you in my phone 24/7, right? I want to be able to talk to you. I want to be able to do all that. I'm gonna be able to do all that every day, all day. It provided this was my anxious attachment movement at the time. This was clinginess attachment at the time. And I think what I came to learn was the expectations that I carried towards certain people in that lane, man, it was unrealistic. It was unrealistic because you never showed me through your behaviors that you had the capacity to do that you were ever interested enough to do that. But my mind went, I'm holding on to this fantasy. I'm holding on to this fantasy of this person. I'm holding on to this fantasy of this outcome, this relationship, and I'm just hoping that it come through. And truth be told, man, it never did. It never did. And the disappointment that I experienced, the crushing feelings that I experienced was really because I was just ignoring reality. It wasn't because they were a bad person. It wasn't because they were awful. It wasn't because they were a hater and they're a manipulator and a gaslighter and a narcissist. All these favorite words that we like throwing around. No, it was just I was expecting more than what I was actually getting. Like I just gotta be honest. I gotta be honest. What I was hoping to be there wasn't there. That's on me, and I gotta take accountability for that. And I think a lot of this conversation is hopefully opening your eyes and ears to see And here, the need in some areas to just take accountability. Yo, I've been holding on to this for so long. And truth be told, I have really never put myself in position to consider what this person never had, what this person was never equipped with. And I've just been mad. And it hasn't been fair. And that doesn't mean that you have to dismiss your experience in order to show empathy or in order to make room for somebody's context. Because get this, you can still be hurt by somebody who didn't have what it took to love you properly. Absolutely. Yes, you didn't have it. You didn't have the tools. You didn't have the equipment. And I'm still hurt. And it still bothered me. And I was still broken by it. And I still need time and space to heal from it. Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. And I think there's room for all of that when it comes to dealing with disappointment. But the one thing I don't ever want you to do in the route of dealing with disappointment is attaching God to something he may have never promised, blaming God for unmet expectations, and allowing disappointment to drive you away from God instead of choosing to stick with God regardless of the outcome that takes place. You know, the 3 Hebrew boys in the book of Daniel, as they were about to get put into the fiery furnace, one of the things that they said that sticks out to me the most is saying they knew that God could deliver them, but even if he didn't, they still wouldn't bow down. And there was something that's communicated in the midst of that text that lets me know that even though they had full-blown confidence that God could do what he could do because he's God and God alone, they also understood that he was not obligated to answer what they were praying. And because of their ability to come to a place of saying, I'm okay if God doesn't answer this. I'm okay if God does not come through with this. I'm okay if God does not decide to answer this in the way that I wish. Peace. And they were standing in front of a fiery furnace that picked up heat that King Nebuchadnezzar was wanting to throw them in to kill them. So if they can say that in the midst of such crazy events like that, surely we can grow to a place where we can say that towards relationships that we need to let go. Certain visions and dreams that we might need to let go of and let die in order to worship God and follow after him and do what he is calling us to do, to live underneath the umbrella of his will. Surely we can do that about relationships and expectations. Surely we can do that. Lord, even if you don't give me this marriage that I really want, even if you don't give me this job opportunity, even if I really don't get all the things that I prayed for and that I hope for in the year of 2025 and beyond, Lord, I can learn to be satisfied with you. And that doesn't mean you can't be frustrated. That doesn't mean you can't grieve it. That doesn't mean you can't allow your emotions to be present and to go through the process of grieving and letting go of those expectations and letting go of all those desires. That's a part of the process. I could not have actually fully healed through the rejections and through the lost relationships if I didn't take time to write out in my journal what I was no longer available to have as a result of this relationship no longer being what I wanted it to be, what I hoped for it to be, or what I wished for it to be. I had to actually write that thing out. No more dates, no more daily conversations, no more laughs, no more. Like, I'm losing all of that. Tears flowed. Absolutely. Anger ensued. Absolutely. Deep sadness was there. You bet it. But one thing that gave me room to do was stick with God through it all. Because I was able to acknowledge what I felt, be honest about it, and bring it to God's attention. Not that he didn't know, but because I needed to process it with him, because with his truth, I'll get through. And that's what I just want to encourage you. Dealing with disappointment is a heavy thing, and we all experience it in so many different facets. But let's not forget that what we're dealing with at the end of the day is a bunch of imperfect people. We're dealing with a bunch of imperfect people, ourselves included, who have disappointed others just like we've been disappointed. And this does not need to be something that we use as a means to excuse what we feel. Oh, get over it. You've disappointed people too. No, that's not in a dismissive manner. What we're saying, however, is that this is just going to put what we're experiencing in better context in order for us to navigate disappointment in a healthier way. If you want to be married, you might want to get good at navigating disappointment in a healthy way. You want to have a family, you want to be a father, you want to be a businessman, you want to do all these amazing things for your community and people around you. You better get better at handling disappointment and not allowing yourself to just run and avoid disappointment all your life. You don't get anywhere by doing that. You miss it completely. And I just think as I've learned and grown, and I'm growing into handling and navigating disappointment in stronger ways, one of the things that always keeps me in a place of peace, in a place of gratitude, in the midst of experiencing disappointment, is allowing myself to reflect on God, reflect on his promises, reflect on who he says I am. That keeps me from identifying my existence to mistakes, to failures, to shame, to disappointment, that allows me to live beyond it and integrate it. And as a result, when it comes to handling other people, I'm able to navigate that better by making room for others to disappoint, by not setting unrealistic expectations on them, by not demanding them to be perfect in every area, by not demanding them to show up in a way that, if I'm being honest, in some cases, I have to learn to show up for myself first. Yeah. And when I'm able to do that, I think all layers of those relationships just grow. It's not to say that it won't hurt. It's not to say that you won't be hurt by disappointment. We just read Peter, who was disappointed that he felt he let down Jesus. And what did he do? He wept bitterly. He grieved the fact that he disappointed Jesus. So please don't hear that you can't grieve through that. What I'm telling you is that disappointment was never supposed to be something that keeps you bound for the rest of your life. And there are some people, as you leave this message, as you leave this pod, there are some people that you're literally going to have to acknowledge disappointed you in different areas of your life. And you're going to have to be willing to let go of the expectations you've carried on them that have kept you from forgiving them, loving them, and that have kept you from getting peace back into your life. You're going to have to let it go. They couldn't show up for you. How could they? They didn't know. How could they? They weren't aware. How could they? They weren't taught. How could they? And then furthermore, there are some people, when it comes to dealing with disappointment, that you might have to sever ties with. Because being disappointed and unwilling to address the root issues that have brought about the continual disappointment in the same space, that's a struggle. Sometimes, right? Sometimes you're going to have to sever with that behavior. You're going to have to sever with that attitude. You're going to have to sever from perhaps that relationship. You might have to let go of those expectations. You might have to stop convincing yourself that God promised you everything under the sun. So that way you can stop being mad at God 24/7 as if you know better than him. You might have to. And I think that's all a part of cultivating healthy relationships with yourself and with others. And I think the more that you're willing to overcome allowing disappointment to rule over your life, I think the quicker you are to arrive at a place of freedom emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And I think that's just where the life is ultimately. All right. Wow. We said a lot. I was not expecting it to be this long, but we said a lot. And I hope this made sense. I hope that you got a lot out of this conversation with some biblical references to it. If you like this kind of content and you want to hear more, subscribe, like the video, share this with a friend, share this whole episode, share a clip or two that I could easily repost over time that you find beneficial and helpful as you are navigating a difficult season and dealing with disappointment and learning how to navigate it in a healthy biblical way. And I pray that these thoughts are just so helpful to you as you move forward in creating happy, healthy, and whole relationships. All right. I love you guys so much. I'm excited for our next conversation and more to come. And until then, be easy and be breezy, my friend. Peace.